God's promises are unshakable no matter what you're going through, no matter how difficult the situation looks. One thing remains true. When God says He will make a way, He will. It may not happen how you expect or when you want, but His word is unfailing. So often when we face trials, the first thing we do is question, God, why is this happening? Why am I struggling? Why does it feel like there's no way out? But if we truly believe in the God we serve, then we have to trust that His word is greater than our circumstances. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 43:19, Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. That means no matter how dry your season is, no matter how hopeless things may seem, God is already making a way. He's not waiting for the perfect conditions. He creates the conditions. Think about the Israelites at the Red Sea. They had just escaped Egypt, but now they were trapped, mountains on one side, Pharaoh's army chasing them, and a vast sea blocking their path. From a human perspective, they had no options. But God doesn't need human logic to operate. With one command, He parted the waters, and they walked through on dry ground. He didn't just make a way, He made a way that no one could have predicted. And that's exactly how God moves in our lives. Some of you may be standing at your own Red Sea right now. You feel trapped by circumstances, surrounded by pressure, and the enemy is whispering, it's over. But I came to remind you today, God has already made a way, and you are about to walk into it. What looks like an obstacle is just an opportunity for God to show His power. The problem is, we often let what we see shake what we believe. We look at the bills stacking up, the doctor's report, the closed doors, the disappointments, and we think there's no way. But faith doesn't rely on what's visible. Faith relies on the promise. God said He will provide. He said He will heal. He said He will deliver. He said He will never leave you nor forsake you. And if God said it, that settles it. Abraham was promised a son in his old age. By human standards, it was impossible. His body was as good as dead. Sarah's womb was barren. But Romans 4:21 tells us that Abraham was fully convinced that God was able to do what He had promised, and because he believed, he saw the promise come to pass. That same God is still working today. He hasn't changed, and His promises haven't expired. Maybe you've been praying for something for a long time, and it feels like nothing is happening. You're starting to wonder if God forgot about you, but He didn't. Just because you don't see it yet doesn't mean He's not working. Some doors take time to open, but that doesn't mean they're locked. God is orchestrating things behind the scenes, moving pieces into place, setting things up for your breakthrough. He is faithful to His word, and when the time is right, you'll step into exactly what He promised. So don't give up now. Don't let frustration rob you of your faith. The God who spoke light into darkness, who made a way through the sea, who raised the dead, He is the same God working in your life right now. If He said He will do it, He will do it. Trust Him. Hold on to His promise. And when He moves, you'll know only God could have made this way. There are moments in life when we come face to face with situations that seem impossible. No way forward, no solutions in sight, no strength left to fight. It's in these moments that we must remember God specializes in the impossible. What looks like a dead end to us is just an opportunity for Him to show His power. When God steps in, what seemed unmovable suddenly shifts. What was broken is restored, and what was lost is found. Look at the Bible and you'll see a pattern. Every time someone faced an impossible situation, God showed up and made a way. The Israelites stood before the Red Sea with an army chasing them. No boats, no bridge, just deep waters ahead. But in one moment, God parted the sea, making a dry path where there had never been one before. When the widow in Zarephath was down to her last bit of flour and oil, preparing to eat her final meal and die, God stepped in and multiplied what she had, sustaining her and her son through famine. When Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, there was no human way out, but God shut the mouths of the lions. Over and over again, we see the same story. Man's limits don't limit God. Maybe you've been told there's no way out of your situation. The doctor gave you a diagnosis with no cure. The job application was rejected. The relationship seems beyond repair. The finances don't add up. But the question is, whose report will you believe? Because the God we serve is not bound by human opinions, statistics, or expectations. When He steps in, what was impossible becomes possible. There was a moment in the New Testament when Jesus was preaching to a crowd of over 5,000 people. The people had been following Him all day, and now they were hungry. The disciples panicked, looking at what they had, just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Logically, that wasn't enough. But Jesus took what seemed insufficient, blessed it, and multiplied it until every person was fed with baskets of leftovers remaining. That's the God we serve. He takes what looks like not enough and makes it more than enough. Some of you feel like what you have isn't enough. You don't have enough strength, enough resources, enough wisdom to get through this. But when you put what you have in God's hands, He makes up the difference. What seems small in your hands becomes mighty in His. What seems like the end to you is just the beginning for Him. God loves stepping into impossible situations because it leaves no room for doubt about who made the way. When everything is stacked against you and suddenly the breakthrough comes, you won't be able to say, I figured it out, or I made it happen. You'll know it was God. And that's exactly what He wants, to receive the glory, to show His power in a way that leaves no question that He alone is the miracle worker. Sometimes He allows situations to reach the breaking point so that when the breakthrough comes, there's no mistaking His hand in it. Think about Lazarus. When Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, He didn't rush to heal him. He waited until Lazarus was dead for 4 days before showing up. Why? Because a healing would have been a miracle, but a resurrection would prove His ultimate power over life and death. When Jesus called Lazarus out of that tomb, there was no question this was the work of God. That same power is still at work today. God is still making a way where there is no way. He is still opening doors that no man can shut. He is still turning hopeless situations around. So don't let what you see make you doubt what God can do. You may not see a way, but He already has one prepared. Hold on, trust Him, and watch as He steps in and does what only He can do. Faith is the key that unlocks the door for God to move in your life. It's not about what you see or what you feel. It's about what you believe. When you activate your faith, you invite God to step in, to intervene, to turn things around in a way that only He can. The problem is too many people wait until they see the breakthrough before they believe. But real faith doesn't wait for proof. Real faith believes before anything changes. Think about the woman with the issue of blood. For 12 years she suffered. She had spent all she had on doctors, tried everything, and yet her condition only got worse. But one day she heard that Jesus was passing by. She didn't have an appointment. No one had called her forward. But something inside her told her, if I can just touch the hem of His garment, I will be healed. That's faith. It wasn't based on what she saw, it was based on what she believed. And the moment she reached out, her healing came. God moves where there is faith. The Bible tells us in Hebrews 11:6, without faith, it is impossible to please God. That means if you want to see Him work in your life, you have to believe even when it doesn't make sense. Even when the situation looks hopeless. Even when the enemy whispers in your ear that it's over. Faith doesn't deny the facts, it just refuses to be limited by them. When Peter saw Jesus walking on the water, something inside of him said, if Jesus can do it, I can do it too. So he stepped out of the boat. Now, as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he walked on water. But the moment he looked at the waves, at the storm around him, he started to sink. What changed? The storm didn't get any stronger. The wind didn't suddenly start blowing harder. The only thing that changed was his focus. And that's exactly what happens to us. As long as our focus is on God, we move forward in faith. But the moment we start looking at the problem, at the struggle, at how impossible things seem, we begin to sink. Some of you are in a situation right now where the enemy is trying to get you to take your eyes off Jesus. He's using fear, doubt, discouragement, anything to make you question whether God is really going to come through for you. But you have to make up your mind today that no matter what it looks like, no matter how impossible it seems, you are going to stand in faith. Because when you stand in faith, you position yourself for a miracle. Every breakthrough in the Bible started with someone believing before they saw it. The walls of Jericho didn't fall because the people saw a crack and said, oh, this might actually work. No, they marched around that city for 7 days without seeing a single sign that anything was happening. But they kept walking, they kept trusting, they kept believing, and on that 7th day, the walls came crashing down. Faith doesn't always mean instant results. Sometimes it's a process. Sometimes it means praying when nothing seems to change. It means worshiping when you don't feel like it. It means stepping out when you don't know where the road leads. But every time you choose faith over fear, you are inviting God to do the impossible in your life. You may not see it yet, but that doesn't mean God isn't working. Your faith is the bridge between where you are and where God is taking you. Keep trusting, keep believing, and watch how He steps in and makes a way where there was no way. Obedience is one of the greatest keys to seeing God move in your life. Sometimes the breakthrough you've been praying for isn't delayed because God isn't willing. It's delayed because He's waiting for you to take a step. Many times we want God to open doors, make a way, bring provision, or change a situation, but we hesitate to do the very thing He's already told us to do. But when you step out in obedience, even when it doesn't make sense, you activate the power of God in your life. Think about Peter when he was out fishing all night. He was a skilled fisherman. He knew the waters, he knew the patterns of the fish, and after hours of working, he came up with nothing. Then Jesus comes along and tells him, go back out into the deep and let down your nets. Now, Peter could have argued. He could have said, Lord, I've already tried that. It didn't work. He could have relied on his experience, his logic, his understanding, but instead he responded with something powerful. Because you say so, I will. And the moment he obeyed, the same waters that had been empty suddenly overflowed with so many fish that his nets began to break. What changed? The water was the same, the boat was the same, the fisherman was the same. The only thing that changed was obedience. When God speaks, it doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always align with what we think should happen. But if you want to see God's hand move in your life, you have to be willing to say, Lord, I don't understand it, but because you say so, I will. Some of you have been praying for God to bless your finances, but He's already asked you to step out in faith and give. Some of you have been asking for direction, but He's already nudging you to move, to shift, to walk away from something that's holding you back. Some of you are believing for a miracle, but He's waiting for you to take that first step of faith. There was a widow in the Old Testament who was down to her last bit of oil and flour. She was ready to make one final meal for herself and her son and then prepare to die. But then the prophet Elijah came and told her something that must have seemed outrageous. Make a small loaf of bread for me first, and then you will have enough. Now logically that made no sense. She barely had enough for herself and her child, and this man was asking her to give first. But instead of arguing, instead of hesitating, she obeyed. And because she obeyed, her jar of flour never ran empty, and her oil never ran dry. God was always capable of providing for her. He had the power to multiply what she had from the very beginning. But the miracle wasn't released until she acted in obedience. What if she had ignored that instruction? What if she had said, I can't afford to give this up? She would have missed out on the blessing that was waiting for her on the other side of obedience. That's how God works. He isn't looking for people who have all the answers. He's looking for people who will say yes before they see the outcome. When He told Abraham to leave his home and go to a land that He would show him, He didn't give him a map, a timeline, or a 5-step plan. He simply said, go, and Abraham obeyed. And because he obeyed, he walked into the promise. There is something God is asking you to do. It may seem small, it may seem insignificant, or it may seem impossible. But that step of obedience could be the very thing that unlocks the breakthrough you've been waiting for. Don't let fear, doubt, or hesitation keep you from what God has in store. Trust Him, step out, and watch how He makes a way where there was no way. Timing is everything, and God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't feel like it. One of the hardest things to do in life is wait, especially when you're waiting for a breakthrough, an answer, a door to open, or a situation to change. The reality is we want things to happen now. We pray and we expect an immediate answer. We step out in faith and we want to see instant results. But God doesn't operate on our schedule. He moves according to His perfect plan. And when the time is right, nothing can stop what He has ordained. Waiting is difficult because it makes us feel like nothing is happening. But just because you don't see anything changing doesn't mean God isn't working behind the scenes. Think about a seed planted in the ground. For a long time it looks like nothing is happening. The soil looks the same day after day. But underneath the surface, roots are growing, strengthening, preparing for the moment when the plant will finally break through. That's how God works. You may not see progress, but that doesn't mean progress isn't happening. Lazarus was sick, and his sisters, Mary and Martha, sent word to Jesus asking Him to come quickly. They knew Jesus had the power to heal. But instead of rushing to their side, Jesus waited. And in that waiting, Lazarus died. To them, it seemed like Jesus had come too late. But Jesus wasn't late. He was setting the stage for something greater. Because a healing would have been a miracle, but a resurrection would reveal God's ultimate power over death. When Jesus finally arrived and called Lazarus out of the tomb, there was no denying that it was God who made the way. So many times we think God is late, we think He's forgotten us, that He's ignoring our prayers, but He's never late. He knows exactly what He's doing. If He made you wait, it's because something greater is on the other side. If the door hasn't opened yet, it's because He's preparing you for what's behind it. And when it finally happens, you'll understand why the timing had to be exactly right. Abraham and Sarah were promised a son, but years passed and nothing happened. They got older and their situation seemed more impossible with every passing day. So they did what so many of us do. They tried to make things happen on their own. Instead of waiting for God's timing, they took matters into their own hands. And it led to a situation that brought pain and struggle. But when God finally fulfilled His promise, when Sarah gave birth to Isaac, it was clear that only God could have made it happen. The delay wasn't denial, it was preparation. There are times when we think we're ready for what we've been praying for, but God knows we aren't. He sees the future. He knows what's ahead. Sometimes He has to strengthen our faith, refine our character, or position the right people in place before the promise can come to pass. If He gave it to us too soon, we wouldn't be able to handle it. That's why trust is so important. Trust that God knows what He's doing. Trust that if He's making you wait, it's because He's working out something better than you imagined. You may feel like you're stuck in a waiting season, like you've been praying and believing, but nothing is happening. But God is not ignoring you. He hasn't forgotten you. He is preparing the breakthrough, the blessing, the opportunity at exactly the right time. And when He steps in, it will be bigger, better, and more powerful than you ever expected. Keep waiting, keep trusting, and when the time is right, you'll see God was making a way all along. There comes a moment in every person's journey when all the waiting, all the trusting, all the praying finally leads to the breakthrough. God doesn't just step in, He steps in with power. He doesn't just make a way, He makes a way in such a way that no one can deny it was Him. And when He moves, it changes everything. Think about the Israelites. They had been in slavery for 400 years, crying out for deliverance. And then one day God stepped in. He sent Moses, performed signs and wonders, and brought them out of Egypt. But even after all they had seen, they still found themselves standing at the Red Sea, trapped between the water and an army coming to destroy them. It looked like they had finally reached the end. like there was no way out. But God had already prepared a way they couldn't see. In a moment, he parted the sea, and they walked through on dry ground. What was once an impossible barrier became the very thing God used to deliver them. That's what happens when God steps in. What looked like it was meant to destroy you becomes the very thing God uses to bless you. The enemy thought he had won, but God turned it around. The problem you thought would never change suddenly shifts. The door that was locked suddenly swings open. And when it happens, there is no question, this was the hand of God. There are things in your life right now that may seem unmovable. Things you've been praying about for years. Things that feel like they will never change. But when God steps in, it won't take years, months, or even days. It will happen in an instant. One word from him, one shift in his timing, and everything will be different. Joseph was sold into slavery, betrayed by his own brothers, and thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit. For years, it seemed like his dreams would never come to pass. But then, in a single moment, everything changed. He went from a prisoner to second in command over all of Egypt in just one day. That's the power of God. He doesn't just restore, he promotes. He doesn't just answer prayers, he exceeds expectation. You might be in a season where it feels like nothing is moving, but don't be discouraged. When God moves, it happens suddenly. One day things look impossible, and the next, you're walking in the promise. That's why you can't give up. You can't quit before the breakthrough comes. The enemy would love for you to walk away right before everything shifts in your favor. But God is faithful. If he said he would make a way, he will. When Jesus was crucified, it looked like the end. The disciples scattered, hope seemed lost, and for 3 days it looked like darkness had won. But then, on the third day, God stepped in. The grave could not hold him. The stone could not keep him. And what looked like the greatest defeat became the greatest victory. That same resurrection power is still at work today. It doesn't matter how dead a situation looks, how hopeless it may seem. When God speaks, life comes forth. You are not forgotten. You are not overlooked. And you are not without hope. The same God who parted the sea, who raised the dead, who turned mourning into dancing, that same God is stepping into your situation. It may not look like it now, but when the breakthrough comes, you'll see. He was making a way all along. Keep believing, keep standing, and when God steps in, nothing will ever be the same again.